Every writer knows that the best conversations about writing don't happen in classrooms or symposia or any other fancy artisanal setting. They happen at the bar, usually after deadline. That's the vibe we're going for here. This is The Other 51, conversations with writers of all genres about writing. I'm Brian Moritz. Today's guest is Evan Drellich from NBC Sports Boston. Evan Drellich, welcome to The Other 51. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Brian, what's going on?
So I feel like we should be doing this at NYSEG Stadium, except, then we'd be in Binghamton, which would be weird on a lot of levels. This is another Binghamton reunion. I haven't had a lot of these, but this is nice. And we worked together in Binghamton, and we saw a lot of really bad baseball together in those days.
What was the name of the shortstop who was there for 4 straight years?
Jose Coronado.
Jose Coronado, yes. Yeah, I still have my memory of covering my first ever high school football game and you showing me how to score it, and I didn't get it at that time, and the only way you can get it is if you go out there and you do it. I remember the night you saved me in the office when I just was not getting the agate done, and you just volunteered to take it so that one of those editors wasn't going to bite my head off as they normally did. So fond memories of you trying to steer me along.
Well, and I have fond memories of you at least scooping me at least once on some Fernando Martinez related news when you were writing, I think, for Mets blog, and I was covering that team. Fernando Martinez. Remember when he was going to be good?
Fernando Martinez was my very first professional player interview. Like, I'd covered Binghamton University, but I walk in there the first day and genius PR man Robert Ford, who's now the world champion Astros broadcaster, your friend as well, didn't provide any guidance or oversight. So you have 19-year-old Fernando Martinez, and I guess 19-year-old me. I don't know, maybe I was 20, whatever age I was right around there. And we wind up in the trainer's room, which is the one place you never do an interview. And I think since my very first interview, I've walked into a trainer's room, I believe one time in Florida in the minor league training room when I was covering the Astros, and I was asked to walk in there. Okay. That's it. Like, you do not go into the trainer's room, and that's where the two young idiots decided this was a good place to hang out and do an interview. So,
well, and Fernando didn't speak much English, if I remember correctly, or he faked that he didn't speak English if he didn't want to talk to me. But I don't remember his English being very good.
Boy, you know what? You're probably right. There probably was a translator, and I think at that point it would have been Carlos Muniz, who did make it up to the big leagues briefly with the Mets.
And that, one of my cardinal rules of baseball coverage, I tell my students, always become friends with the catcher, or get a good relationship with the catcher. The catchers know everything, man. They are good.
No, that's okay. These days you can be friends with them and go drinking with them. It's all right. The rules
the rules are different. That's good to know. That's excellent. So. What do you, God, we covered bad baseball. I mean, this was the Mets from 2006 to like 2008, 2009. And they had the one decent year of prospects where they had Murphy and John Neese and Nick Evans and Bobby Parnell come through. But aside from that, man, there was nothing. And I'm curious, what was it like? I remember you were learning the ropes. You were one of our interns in Binghamton, and you were studying to be a journalist. But you had also come up as a Mets fan. So I was wondering, what was it like to be at covering that level of baseball as both a fan and someone who was kind of actively making that transition from fan to journalist?
Well, I mean, there were still moments of like, whoa, that guy I see it. Like the day Lasting's millage came down. I do remember there still being the excitement of a guy like that being there, and that excitement is typically non-existent these days. When we're talking about now literally a decade, which is scary. I don't remember struggling with it though from a writing standpoint or anything. I think I was. I guess I had the mindset. I don't remember who exactly told me when. I believe it was at Newsday in 2009, be a reporter first, one who just happens to write about sports. Once I started covering, we were out there enough, and the days I wasn't covering the Binghamton Mets, I was biking into the Press Sun to do agate. The first year I did that was 2007. It was hard for me to really follow the big league Mets that year. So the separation began naturally. You throw yourself into the team, into the work, I wasn't a double A baseball fan. I was a big league Mets fan. So, I don't know. People sometimes are still, what, you don't root anymore? You don't feel it? And it's like, no, it happens naturally. I don't think I had to force myself to it.
Yeah, that is an interesting point. I mean, that's one of the things that always comes up when you're teaching sports writing or talking about it, like the whole fan journalist divide. And I've often felt like it's a scale, right? There's not like I don't think there's like you are a fan or a reporter there, but you bring up a really cool point. I never thought of it that way, like how it happens naturally. Like it's not you go to a journalism class and stop being a fan that day. It is kind of a progression in a way.
Yes, yeah. I think I've admitted publicly, the only time in recent years that when the Mets made the World Series in 2015, I was able to it transported me back a little bit. It brought me back to the feeling of being younger. But it didn't. Even if we are trained, and I think if you go into this, you have a sense of obligation to write and report as objectively as possible. And I think there's a self-awareness of your own feelings involved. I mean, if you're really, I don't know, I don't think I've really been too blind to any sports related feeling I've had about something, even if I don't like this guy on the field, and there are certainly players that you come to enjoy talking to more and talking to less in the course of doing things. If you're not aware in your writing that exists, and that you might in turn say something because of it, you have to be able to read yourself, I guess is the way to put it, and to know yourself. But yeah, if you're letting something seep into your work, you're certainly making a mistake.
So I wanted to ask, because you, like you said, you were an agate clerk when I was at the Press Sun-Bulletin for a couple summers while you were studying at BU, and I feel like, and I certainly do this with myself too. You look back on those like early agate shift days, and it's the natural thing, I think, to say how that shaped you as a reporter and that grounded you and all this stuff. And I'm wondering, looking back, like how true is that? Like, what did you kind of learn from being around me and Stevens and Mangan and Mike Sharp and Charlie Jaworski and all the guys at Binghamton? Like what did that, looking at it now, what did that teach you about being a journalist, a sports journalist?
Well, I still hear Jaws, Charlie Jaworski, our late editor, besides yelling at me, he had a very minimalist, old school AP style approach to writing. I mean, it was basically at the very outset, he broke me down from, I'd been a blogger, but I didn't really know what I was doing as far as writing. I guess to some extent I did. You have some sort of natural flair that maybe didn't need to be totally eliminated at that point in time, but it was stripped down. It was get these basics right. I mean, the very first night I worked there, I was taking tennis scores, and I did not take the name of the coach, which in retrospect seems silly. How could you not take the name of the person you were talking to? But I was a 19-year-old idiot, and these calls are coming in fast and furious, and you just don't know what you're doing. And I swear, and he denied this a couple of years after the fact, but it happened. He said, "Do you like working here?" He was intimating he was going to fire me the very first night I worked there. So it was really a lesson of the fundamentals. I mean, going out and covering high school football games for $40, doing the running box score. I still maintain there's nothing harder in the sports journalism world outside of things that leak into the more hard news world. The moments of going for court records and that type of stuff aside. The hardest thing is is taking a running box score at a high school football game and meeting an early deadline. It's just the attention span required. When I go to these baseball games, I'm sitting there. I've got they're tracking every pitch. I can get up for 3 innings, and essentially have little fear of having missed much of anything that cannot be caught up on. And that's not the case down there, right? And that's not the way you should approach anything you're doing. You should be paying as much attention as possible. So it was about the fundamentals of don't try to be Bill Simmons, who I was not trying to be. I didn't like Bill Simmons. I was not a big reader of his, but don't try to. You got to know the X's and O's before you can do anything special. You know, I think that's what you guys were showing me.
Yep, and I still hear Charlie's voice in my head, but in a different way. Because my favorite thing about Charlie would be when he would either yell across the newsroom, the old newsroom, or he would call me up with a question, and I would be, Charlie, read the next line, read to the end of the sentence, and then he would read it, and he'd be okay, bye. And Charlie, who was a great, like you said, a great old school editor, unfortunately passed away a few summers ago. He would. Instead of when he would edit a story, instead of like you'd read the story and then other editors there would say, okay, I got to call you up after they've read the story with like 4 questions or 2 questions or whatever. Charlie would call you as he was reading it in real time, and there were more than one times where he would call me up. What is this person's age? You didn't say their age. You have to say their age. Charlie, read the next line. Read to the end of the sentence. Okay, bye, and then hang up. So
he had all these little rules that. You know, even at that time, we're kind of getting phased out. I'm trying to think of one. You know, referring to if you kind of introduce a team and then in the next sentence don't directly refer to it by name, you kind of. He was just a stickler for very specific things. You know, if either of us were to say new record, I think and I still see it on Twitter or on a telecast all the time. If it's a record, it's not new, folks.
Right.
Let's remember that.
So, how would you cover Tim Tebow if that had happened while we were there?
In terms of would I make him the focal point of my daily coverage?
Yeah, kind of. Because I think I've been thinking about this, kind of watching it from afar, and like I'm removed from the business 10 years now, so like I have a different perspective. But I just think it would be so much fun to be covering him in Binghamton right now. And like I said, I would have like
living, whatever. This is a discussion.
Well, no, that's what I would be I want to know, like, where does he live? You know, somebody like that who, you know, it's not like a guy who comes in for like a 2-week rehab assignment or something like that, and he just stays at a hotel or whatever. Like, where's he living? Where's he going to eat? That's the stuff I want to know. Like, that's fascinating to me. Like, obviously, he's not a good baseball player. We know that, but I don't know. I just find it very cool, and I'm wondering, like, having covered the Bigs so long, what's your perspective on something like that? Is it skewed a little bit? Would it still be kind of more? Would it be more like, what's he doing here? Like, I'm wondering if that perspective has changed how you would view a story like this.
Yeah, you know, when I was there, the job I was doing, I mean, occasionally I would fill in for you doing the daily gamer stuff for the Press Sun, but I was doing Scout.com, an inside pitch magazine, and I wasn't writing every day. The idea back then for me was to basically try to write features, and in retrospect, it was really good training because I sat down with a lot of these guys and just kind of tried to find something a little more offbeat. Or, I'm trying to remember who it was, but, a guy working at the tire factory in the off season. It's like, wow, people don't think about that kind of stuff. And, it's not the first time you've heard that story, but, so I think early on that was just where I was steered to. I think it's become more in recent years valuable to have that, break away from the pack mindset, because you've had the fracturing of the newspapers, you have different outlets cropping up. The enterprise element of it does seem to be more and more prominent. Like the better stories, I think we typically read. Sometimes you read a tremendous game story still. I mean, it does happen, but it feels like everyone is now trying to differentiate themselves, maybe in a way that wasn't true in the past, where we just have 8 accounts of the primary moments of that game. So I think you're hitting the nail on the head. Maybe it isn't an off the podcast conversation. It's actually, you're right. The thing that just piqued my interest the most, because it is a small college town where Wegmans was the greatest place to go.
Still is, by the way.
The thing that interests me about Tebow is probably what would interest other people as well. And then to the same point, certainly someone else on that team, multiple people would have interesting backstories, and the trick would be to find them and not get into some sort of routine of Tebow. And I guess the only caveat there would be is if you're working for an outlet that is just so click driven and Tebow's so tremendously popular that you're forced into it. But even then, I would say to my editor, if I could, like, listen, we need to do our readers a little bit more of a service here and show them something else that's going on.
Right. I think my idea was to basically after the first couple of games, I would have like a daily Tebow, where it almost be like a box where you just update like what he did, maybe a little fact about like what he said or something after the game. But then that had that daily presence because people want to know that.
Yes.
But also that frees you up to write other stories. But anyway, so you went to Binghamton University. It's where we met. No journalism program at BU. You have an English degree, right?
That is correct. There was the School of Hard Knocks at the Press Sun and the internships and the student newspaper, which is called Pipe Dream, which doesn't make much sense. But,
That's okay. My student newspaper was called the Bonaventure. So you at least got your school at least got creative with it. We literally took the name
very
of the
imaginative State University of New York students we are.
I'm just curious. Obviously, you've done well for yourself in the career, but not having gone to journalism school and only having maybe one or if at most a handful of journalism classes, was there any difficulty early on breaking into the field or doing it without that university training, or didn't it matter much?
Well, it's one of those things. Do I enjoy being an only child? Well, I don't know. I never had the sibling. The way it's often, the way I looked at it, and it's probably because somebody had told it to me this way, was that you went to journalism school if you wanted to specialize in some way, if you wanted to teach, or if kind of coming out of college, maybe you hadn't come to it quickly enough, or had done the internships, but it's always been at least newspaper writing and kind of more the traditional reporting was regarded as something of a trade that you did by doing, and that you didn't have to go to journalism school for that. I'm sure you're better off for it. I don't think there's any way it hurts you, and it only opens more doors. And again, that specialization issue. But no, it's never like once I got out there, I was like, I really should have done that. And maybe, I do think that, look, when you go to journalism school, you're getting X number of more opportunities to do internships just by virtue of still being in school. And that in itself could have been incredibly valuable. I was lucky enough. I got hired after I had an internship after graduating, and then I got hired there. So no, there hasn't been a moment where it's like, man, I should have done that. I have in my head thought, well, I wonder what I could gain from it. And I'm sure I would be able to gain something, not to the point of applying or anything, but, maybe if I want to teach someday, you'll show me the way.
How did you don't want to teach. You're fine doing what you do. Can you, so we kind of dealt a lot at the early stage of your career, but can you trace your career path to how you got from that kid at Binghamton to working for NBC Sports Boston now?
Yeah, I mean, so I do this internship at Newsday after Scout.com. Newsday that was a pretty big name to have in my resume, and they had me out at Major League games. Like I went to Citi Field, NBC Stadium that year. It was 2009, and I actually took an extra semester at Binghamton, which enabled me to take an internship the following year. And I was number 31. Actually, I think it was technically 29 or 30, but I was the odd man out for the MLB.com internships, which, have been great for years and years and have a lot of people have gone through. And so I ended up getting that. They said to me, can you go to Los Angeles? And fortunately, I was able to do it. There's no hesitation for me, and maybe some people would have not been able to do it, but I was able to. And going to LA, I worked my butt off out there. There was no intern for the Angels that year. And then they hired me part-time. They said, can you move to Boston? Of course, they weren't going to pay for relocation. Why would they do that? And I did that. And it's just, that enterprise stuff I'd started to do in Binghamton set me up when I got to MLB.com, because I was doing these kind of desk shifts and whatever, basic preview writing, but there was still this idea of once a week or once every 2 weeks doing these enterprise stories. And I stuck my teeth into that, and you just kind of, it was it was the same mindset growing on itself. And then I got my first full-time beat job at masslive.com, which is now, now they had two Red Sox beat writers for a while, and one of them just left for the Athletic, and they've kind of really jumped off. And then I went to, I guess you could say the next break after that was going to the Houston Chronicle, and I covered the Astros. I left before they won the World Series, but and then there was a big dice roll for me, kind of personally. I came back to Boston to the Herald because I felt there just was nowhere to go in Houston professionally. I was at the one paper there. I didn't see how I could grow, and I come back to Boston. Then within a year of being at the Herald, I end up at Comcast Sports at New England, which is now NBC Sports Boston. I had no plans to be in TV. I had no plans to be in radio. I love it when people on Twitter are, oh, he just wants to be wants to be seen and heard. No, I just wanted to be a baseball beat writer for when Charlie Jaworski asked me, and I was told he was going to ask this question because you remember Mark Masick, who worked at Newsday. He had worked there, and he said he's going to ask you when you walk into his office for the first time what you want to do. And I said I wanted to cover the Mets for the New York Post. I mean, that's it. That was the goal, and then I did that, and now I've ended up in a whole other world. So I'm a product of the early lessons compounding on itself, and then being in a market where there are other opportunities.
So, and that Mass Live beat writer, now the Athletic, Jen McCaffrey, I had her on last week.
That's right.
And
yes.
so I asked her this question, and I'll ask you, and you've been on it for a while, but what's life like on the Boston Red Sox beat?
It's good in some. One of the things when covering the Astros, despite the fact that it's the AL West and you're going to Houston to Seattle 3 times a year, which is beautiful. Seattle is. Houston's nice. I wouldn't. Some parts are beautiful, not all of it. The camaraderie is nice. It's not with everybody. You're not friends with everyone, but just to have a group of people living this odd lifestyle does matter. This is the one thing nobody ever told me going into this. Or if they did, I really didn't listen, was how odd this lifestyle is. And you're living in a slightly parallel universe to your friends who are working the more traditional 9-to-5s, who have the opportunity to go to happy hour and have weekends off consistently. I mean, even just the winter, summer, teachers, they have the summer off. Well, you're in the opposite way. You want to go see Europe? Well, you're probably going to the winter. Enjoy the cold. I've done that a few times. So, I mean, look, and this is first world problems at its finest, but the lifestyle stuff does matter. And being a big beat, it's nice to have people around you with it. Now, in terms of the professional side of things, because the fishbowl element that we talk about with Boston being so hard for the players, it also has become that for the media, particularly with talk radio. There's a lot of people watching what you do, and you're going to. You kind of have to be able to take some heat, I mean, at least if you're going to kind of, it depends on your job role and what you're doing, but people are reading and people are going to be critical, because that is in itself its own sport up here, is the media coverage, which is strange but true. And then, you add in Twitter and the player media relations. It was not a good year last year for Red Sox players and media in terms of getting along. So I don't think Boston is so much different than New York or Philadelphia in terms of the aggressiveness people bring. I would actually say that media in Boston and in New York and Philly might be more aggressive than Boston, but the environment being such a small city does change things.
This has come up on other podcasts I've done too, and talking about Boston sports media, and of all the cities, it seems like, I don't know, there's like Boston sports media is almost, like you said, its own beat, its own little sport, like the watching of it and the critiques of it, and it just, New York is New York, and it's a very kind of big, aggressive market. And Philly's like that too, but what is it that about Boston and Boston sports and Boston sports media that makes it this weird kind of mix, this weird brew of, I don't know, weird interest in it or something? But it seems like of all the city's media, we talk about Boston, we like in the sports media world talk about Boston media a lot more than almost any other cities.
Well, I think So as I've had these discussions, and now I myself do radio, which is strange. It's to some degree you need to separate, and this is where, from an academic perspective, I don't know how it's looked at, but when we say the sports media scene in Boston, we are referring to a very large group of people. Now, some of us, I am in this weird spot where I am. It would have been unimaginable for Charlie Jaworski what I'm doing, which is occasionally writing a straight news story, more often writing a column, still sometimes writing a feature, and then going on the radio, being something of a personality, and then doing it on TV. Right, this do it all thing. You're not supposed to do that. You were either a beat writer or columnist, and that was it. But most people are still kind of in those more traditional roles. And I think the radio scene in Boston, and it's really two programs, the two stations, WEI, 98.5, the Sports Hub. Both of them have two programs that are dominant. 98.5's got Felger and Maz in the afternoon. WEI has Kirk and Callahan in the morning. And those two have generated a significant amount of controversy, even in just the last year. Between them, you have the sensitivity training being rooted. Sensitivity training EEI was for a variety of things, but those, the Roy Halladay comments were on Felger and Maz, and I think that's when you get the national attention. Is when you have stuff that really sets people off. Just things in terrible taste and that are offensive. So that to me is different than New York. It's not the Mike and the Mad Dog that I grew up with, and that I loved Mike and the Mad Dog. I don't think this type of radio exists elsewhere. Certainly not two programs like that, and it's not to put down the other programs, but those are the powerhouses. So, I think a lot of Boston sports media discussions were really talking about the radio, and I can't take myself out of that because I do a little bit of radio, but I'm not in any way a driving force on the radio like that. So I guess what I would love is more specificity, and for anyone who refers to it,
right?
And it's just because we do get a lot of it. If one beat writer is particularly kind in their coverage, and they're at a prominent outlet, then everyone in the market gets painted a certain way.
Right.
And that's frustrating. It's frustrating because we all do things differently. There is groupthink in the media, as you know, but we're still individual operators to a degree. And that's, it's very hard, I think, for the public to pick up on the nuance of the individuals and the body of work, right? I mean, you might see one tweet, you might see one story, you might hear one thing on the radio, and then your opinion is formed, and it's like anything else. Take in all the information.
Right. Or kind of like you go in thinking one thing about sports media or about Dan Shaughnessy or about the guys on EEI or whatever radio station, and then you hear a clip or see a tweet, and that reinforces your pre-existing opinion on it. And now that we can kind of amplify those voices with Twitter and Facebook and all these social media, it probably just kind of feeds and kind of circles back in on itself.
Yes, and a lot of times that more traditional line between a columnist and a beat writer, when Shaughnessy is a columnist, has been a columnist for a long time, it just there's a lack of grasp on that, and it's probably unfair to expect the public to get it. Maybe we, as a collective media, don't do a good job delineating these things. Maybe it's not something people care about enough. But you do have to sort through, because it is such a large market, and you're asking why do people? It's to some degree, I think it is slightly reflective of the political climate where people enjoy. And kind of are looking more closely at media, maybe now than they ever have. I think there's a trickle down effect with the sports media as well. People want to say hot takes all the time. If you can write a well reasoned column or even just an analysis piece, and this is the discussion I would love to have at some point, is what the hell's the difference between analysis and opinion? Where do you draw that line? Because I don't know. Because a good game story is analysis.
Right.
If you're writing the facts of the game, as you and I used to do for high school stuff, it's not analysis. It's not compelling reading. And so when does analysis teeter into opinion and a column? And I think that line is really hard to get to. what was the point I was going to make with this? I don't remember, because now you got me so excited about the.
No, the analysis opinion thing, that's something like I'm dealing with right now with some research I'm doing, is defining what we mean by an analysis story, as compared to a game. It's that weird kind of nebulous spot between a gamer and what you and I learned as, what we think of as a traditional game story, and a column, which is, a traditional column. And this analysis thing is like this weird little, it when you see it type deal. And it's weird because I think, like, as someone as more just straight consumer of sports media right now, I like analysis from my beat writers, because you guys are there every day. You know it better than a columnist who might only come to 2 games a week at most, or kind of parachute in on something. But it does kind of, I think maybe it comes down to, like, when you're writing it, how much of the analysis is kind of rooted in straight reporting versus straight opinion. But even as I say that, I think, well, all the best columns are reported and not just somebody shooting off at the lip or something like that. So I don't know.
Yeah.
You struggle with it. I struggle with it in doing it too. And I think, I don't know, that is a tough thing.
When I first got to, when I was doing that internship at Newsday, one of the beat writers who's still on the beat, who's excellent. They're in New York. I shouldn't narrow them down too much, although I don't think they would care. But they made the point to me very early on. You're always editorializing, right? And to some degree, this is something that my eyes have been open to only a little bit more as I've gone along. And it's not editorializing in a bad way, and I'm pushing an agenda type of way necessarily, but if you are deeming a play to be poor and describing why that play was poor, that is a form of interjecting your opinion, your thoughts, your analysis, whatever you want to do. And then you get into the thing that always strikes me is, you can discuss with PR people sometimes about, well, you wrote this, but you didn't write that. Well, where's the line? How do where do you? And there's always a bit of a cost-benefit analysis sometimes, with certain things. That's the reality of it, right? I mean, if the thing I come back to is, well, there is this threshold that we all have inside of, if something is newsworthy, if something has to be reported, you will report it. You absolutely will. But then within that, if you're doing your job well, if you are good at your job, you are not pulling punches. But there might be punches or descriptions or facts, whatever it might be, that are ultimately optional, that are not necessary, that you could throw in there for whatever sake, just for the sake of giving detail. Who knows what it might be? I mean, and this is the thing. I have so many digressions here that you're getting me going on. Every situation is so vastly different, and that's why journalism school. I would actually be curious to go through it a little bit and see, how does the practical and the theoretical line up? Does the classroom setting actually prepare you for certain things? Because there have been scenarios I've sat back and gone, holy crap, who would have thought of this, and what the hell do you do with it? Mm-hmm. Because and there are moments like that, but in terms of that, these choices we make, you do make all these. You're making constant little choices, and are those choices editorializing? If I'm putting something in the third graph as opposed to the first graph, am I making any sense? For what I deem most important, but the AP, the pyramid, the most important information goes up top. Well, you are making a choice about the most important information.
Right. No, I make this argument all the time. It's like my research is based on that idea, the idea of news as a social construction, which I won't get into the theoretical because who cares. But it's the idea that, news doesn't exist in the world. Like, you can't go to something and say, aha, that's news. Like you can, that's a tree. News is how we as journalists define it. And it is those decisions that you make. So even the blandest AP story is, well, it's a decision that I have made as a writer, or you made as a writer, or someone made as an editor, that this is the most important thing. And you're right. In some way, that's opinion. That's analysis. That is what I have decided is most important. And that might not be what person reading the story wants to know or thinks is most important. And so, I think for us,
but I say 98% of us are, I don't know 98%, but I might be naive. The problem is when people start to will hear that and someone listening to this and go, I told you these guys are,
yes,
they're not on the level, and then that's what I just haven't seen it. Look, I know that in the political world, people are very clearly set out for their own agendas, but I don't think people go into what we're doing with the idea of particularly in sports, of somehow being nefarious. It's just you're trying to do it right and fairly. I really believe that. I always have. I maintain that, and I think that's the problem with this discussion, is it gives gateway to people to be cynical.
Right.
When that's not the point, really. It's not in questioning the intentions and ultimately execution that we bring.
No, but it is just kind of acknowledging that notion. So I want to give you a chance. You wrote a book.
Yeah, someone let me write a book. Can you, I don't know.
What were they thinking? Oh, what the hell, dude?
I did. Yeah, it was a fascinating thing to do, and it was an incredible amount of work. It's called The Big 50. It's part of a series by Triumph Books, and it's it's ranking and looking at both teams and moments and players in 50 of them, as you might imagine, in Red Sox history. And the best chapters, every chapter is fantastic. You'll never put it down. But the best chapters I found were reasonably the ones where I had new interviews, and I certainly blew well past deadline to get as many new interviews as I could. And it was great for me to try to take, presented with the Ted Williams chapter. Well, what am I? And I talked to Dan. I talked to Dan Shaughnessy about this, and it's like, well, everything's been said, right? It's like, yeah, and 1,000 times. But the thing I ultimately, I think succeeded in doing in some ways, was taking a little bit of a, here in 2018, and maybe from a generational perspective as well, how do I look at it? And the Ted Williams chapter, just talking about this reality of him that, we go 20 years, 50 years from now with David Ortiz, we're going to have a tremendous amount of video to look back on with David Ortiz. Mm-hmm. But he will be easier to know than Ted Williams will be for you, for me, and anyone kind of anywhere near our age range, because it's verbal. It's little clips that we've gotten of Ted Williams. So I when I could, I tried to find points about these players' legacies, or maybe something that hadn't been too focused on about their time in the game, was intriguing, while also maintaining a sense of a basic overview, which was a challenge. It wasn't easy to. It was basically 50 1,400 word essays. Was the way to look at it. So thank you for mentioning.
Yeah, when's it out?
It is out in ebook now, and you can get that at any of the regular places like Amazon. And the print version says May 15th, although I got an email that it's shipping earlier, at least from Amazon. But May 15th is the technical launch date.
Awesome. So what's the best thing you've read lately?
The best thing I've read lately. Tim Britton, who's now at The Athletic, went down to Puerto Rico. I thought he did an excellent job talking to Alex Cora. I was kind of waiting for someone. When we get a new manager, a new primary figure on a team, it used to be standard practice that someone would do a deep dive, that you would kind of try to get to know the person a little better, and that sticks out. In the last few days, there was something else I read front to end recently that is escaping me, but I find it more and more rare when it comes to a long form story that I will truly have it and give the time to it. And when I do it, I usually step away and say, wow, I did it because it was that good. And,
cool.
And there aren't a ton of those. And I'm going to regret not having put together a longer list for you before this.
So
I wasn't asked to prep them, so I'll blame the teacher.
It's okay. I've only asked this on every episode of the show I've ever done. One long form piece I can recommend you give the time to is from 538. I think it was like 2 weeks ago now, as this is coming out, but it's the Moscow midterm. And Claire Malone, their politics reporter, wrote it. And it's really interesting. It looks at the potential for Russian hacking into the 2018 midterms, and like kind of from a realistic, this sounds weird to say, but realistic worst case scenario. Like, what is the worst thing that cyber experts, elections experts think could happen? And the way she wrote it was really cool, because she wrote it as like a fictional narrative annotated with her real reporting. So it's like a nonfiction novel, basically. Like the narrative she writes is fiction, all based on what could potentially happen on it. And she points out like that the biggest fear for Russia is not necessarily screwing with results, but getting in and screwing with voter rolls. So you'd go and changing data. So you'd go to vote and show them your ID, and it says like you live at 1 Maple Street, but the voter roll says 3 Maple Street, and your middle initial is changed, and now you can't vote. So it kind of creates that. So it was a creative way to tell the story, and it was really well done and well reported. So if you have time, you can add that to the list of stuff.
Innovation within literary journalism.
Yeah.
That's great.
Exactly. So, all right, Evan, if people want to follow you and find you, where's the best place to do that?
Twitter at Evan Drellich, Drellich is the last name, and then Facebook is just facebook.com/Drellich. So I'm on both, and I spend too much time on Twitter, Brian.
I know.
It's not good.
So do I. So do we all. We all do. But it's better than Facebook these days, so it's got that going for it.
I guess. I guess there are fewer trolls on Facebook than on Twitter.
Amazingly so. Well, this has been a lot. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks, friends. Great talking to you.
As always, thanks for listening to The Other 51. You can find show notes for this episode and all our episodes at sportsmediaguy.com on the Other 51 tab. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I can highly recommend Overcast for this. Our theme music is by Ellie Moritz.